Are we live? Oh, fuck, we're live. Ha ha ha. Okay. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is the Austrian, and I'm sorry about that little blooper stream before that. Technical issues. But anyway, uh, I am looking at another libertarian YouTuber who has recently made a video responding to that guy T and his position on immigration and closed borders v open borders. And Shane Killian is a guy who I enjoy watching a lot, and I think he does make some very good stuff. But unfortunately, on this issue, I do have to disagree with him and the points he put forward and the points he puts forward in this video. Now, that guy T's video is linked in his video, which I would encourage everybody to go watch. But on top of that, I'm just going to give a quick summary of Shane's video, why I disagree with it, and why I disagree with the points he's making. And I don't think I can play the video for you, unfortunately, because I haven't gotten the YouTube app for Google Hangout because I'm a spaz and can't do technical shit. But anyway, to give you a brief summary, it's a lot like my last stream video thing where I went over that article from Brian Kaplan at the FEE, who's actually a coworker of that guy T. That guy T works for the FEE as well. We're not all perfect, but anyway. So he starts off with the first point, that being, he starts off with a similar philosophical case that Brian Kaplan makes, that being that, oh, I should just be able to invite people over to my property because it's my property, and the state denying people access to it is a violation of my rights. Well, yeah, it is, but this is ignoring the simple truth that you're not just inviting people over for a barbecue and then they're going back to Mexico. That's not happening. You'd have to be incredibly naive to think that's happening. These people are coming over, staying on welfare, using our public services, barely paying taxes. This is all well documented. It is not a free cost. It's not just them coming over to your pork barbecue or whatever analogy he uses. It's not that simple. Now, he does go on to actually make an economic case for immigration using his last video as a source. If you go to the descriptions, this is the one he's referencing most often, and it does have some sources in it. I have only looked into a little bit of this video. Maybe I'll go back and actually respond to this one if I get some decent equipment and feel like I have the time. But just responding to this one right now, he makes the case that immigration is an economic boon based on the fact that, oh, they pay more in taxes, which is a claim he made, that they create more jobs, that they're less likely to commit crime. And I haven't seen all of his sources for this, because even in his original video, when I went to go look in the description of that original video for sources, it doesn't have them linked. He just has the titles of the sources listed in his video. So I imagine a Google search would bring them up fairly quickly. Unfortunately, I'm just responding to this one off the cuff. Now, I don't know where he's getting this idea that illegal immigrants pay more in taxes than most Americans, or that they even contribute a huge amount. In a few of the sources from my last video, it estimated the amount they pay to be around 12 billion, 13 billion, which I believe was from, I believe that was a report from the Congressional Budget Office. I can go back and check that, though. I will post the relevant links when I find in the video after the stream. On top of that, but when you consider the fact that all state, local, and federal when the state, local, and federal governments combine, they collect somewhere around 7 trillion, I believe was the number in taxes when I gave it a quick Google search. 12 billion is a minuscule amount. Now, I have heard estimates as high as 100 billion, which I haven't seen any sources for, but if you do have the links to that, I'd be more than happy to take a look. But I don't see that happening, and there's an important reason for that, and the reason for that being that the Heritage Foundation conducted a study in which they tested the quintiles of taxpayers, and the bottom 2 quintiles all had tax deficits, meaning they received in public services they received more public services and other forms of government handout than what they paid in taxes. And from my last video, I discussed how all illegal immigrants, one way or another, are working within those lower two quintiles. Even plenty of legal immigrants are working within those lower two quintiles. So they have a tax deficit. So they are by no means giving back more than they are taking out of the government. That is just not true, at least with the sources I've looked at. Again, unfortunately, I haven't had the time to look at his sources. I wish he listed them in the description as opposed to just putting their names up in the video, because unfortunately, I don't have time to go through the whole video, but maybe at a later date. Now, he also goes on to make the claim that they create jobs, and to an extent they do. Of course, cheap labor creates jobs in other sectors because you can redistribute that money. But at the same time, it's money that's being taken away in taxes. As that guy T mentions in the original video that Shane Killian is responding to, the left and even neocons are pushing for higher taxes to pay off deficits, to pay off debts. So these extra jobs that are being created are immediately being pushed out of creation the second they're created. It's a very instantaneous process. Now, he does have somewhat of a response to this. His response is that, oh, just because the welfare state exists, just because we have a massive, hyper-inclusive democracy that is constantly stripping away our rights, just because you have one big government program doesn't justify the other big government program. And in this case, he's referring to the welfare state justifying closed borders. And first off, I have to somewhat scoff at the idea of closed borders being a big government program. I'd like to see by what standard he measures big government programs, because in terms of federal funding, border control is negligible. It is very negligible. I admit it increases a good bit on the state level, but that's because on the state level, it's a serious problem. There are serious issues with gun violence and gang violence. There's a huge issue with the Zeta cartel coming over from Mexico. These are no small instances of violence. And so the states are very much justified in spending the amounts they do in securing their borders. I wish the federal government would, quite frankly, reroute some of that useless money they spend on the welfare state to the borders. That would actually be quite impressive. It'd be nice to know they're actually looking out for our security for once, instead of just sitting on their asses and promoting terrorist groups in Syria. But I digress. His claim that one big government program doesn't justify another is false on its face. One, because closed borders isn't a big government program, even when you look at state spending on it. And two, yes, it does. If you want to get rid of the welfare state, like libertarians like Shane Killian claim, then you can't just have an increasing number of people going on the dole. You will never solve a problem like that. I get into it with some people in the comments of this video, and I try to make them understand that if you're treating someone for alcoholism, you don't want to give them more shots of whiskey. You need to cut them off eventually. And if we are going to solve the welfare state, we need to cut the supply of people off who will be going on the welfare state. It's pretty simple. I don't understand how that's not a straightforward process, but all government programs are equally bad in the eyes of naive libertarians kind of like Shane. And that's a shame, because that's stupid. There is no closed borders and the welfare state are two completely different programs that need to be treated under a different light. Not all government programs are created equally. Yes, they're all invasive to some level, but as libertarians, we are being intellectually dishonest when we are saying all of them are equally authoritarian. That is by no means that's not a good argument. That is not an argument, as Stefan Molyneux might say. The topic then takes a shift from, say, just immigration from Mexico, some of the economic ramifications, to cultural implications. And I don't know Shane's position on culture or identity politics in general. I imagine he's completely against it. I am to some extent as well. But the points he makes here are not factually accurate. He makes the point in his original video that Shane is responding to, that one of the things we ought to do, or one of the reasons we ought to have tighter immigration control, is to preserve American culture. And Shane foolishly goes, oh, what is American culture? Well, it's the Protestant work ethic we received when the Pilgrims came over here. It's the integration of the French Enlightenment into our government. It's the Anglo-Saxon tradition of the Magna Carta and all these other things that gave America its intellectual heritage. And quite honestly, it's a European heritage. He does make some points where it's like, oh, you know, the Germans came over and the Irish came over and everybody was so afraid that they were going to destroy our culture, but they didn't. Yeah, that's because they're European. Shane is trying to be a cultural relativist here, but it's not going to fly. The cultures of the Irish and the German and the Hungarians and the Slavs and whoever you want to pull from Europe is inherently different than the cultures of, say, the Middle East or of Southeast Asia. It's not a valid comparison to make. And he goes on about how T makes some inaccurate comparisons here, or some false dichotomies, which I should have gotten into, and I'll return to briefly, but that's just as inaccurate of a comparison. He also goes on to state that during the 1800s, we had a period of open immigration, of open borders, so to speak, to a certain extent. And that's not true at all. That is historically inaccurate. There were heavy limitations on immigration in the 1800s and 1900s. You had to come, you had to know who you were living with, you had to have all your paperwork, you had to have some kind of job lined up or some kind of money to support yourself. People did not get in just for nothing. That is historically inaccurate, and I do not know where he pulls that from, but he needs to do his research. That's a pitiful attempt, quite frankly. And so he also then goes on to state a case where that, this is jumping back to the philosophical case for open borders again, that, oh, if I just invite them over to my party, then it's an inactive thing. They're not encroaching on anyone's right. Although, I guess I kind of covered this already. Yes, they are. They're not just staying for your barbecue. They're coming to abuse the welfare state and coerce American citizens out of their money by using the state. As long as the state exists, Shane, there is no inactive position in immigration. One way or another, the people who come here illegally will be using the state against us. So you're wrong. T makes the comparison that the state will be used against us, and you claim, oh, that's just a good case for ending the welfare state. No, the welfare state will be used against us. It's a good case for shutting down access to the welfare state by shutting down open borders. That is a completely valid comparison. You can't just pretend the state doesn't exist. Jumping back to the cultural thing. I'm so sorry I'm all over the place. But anyway, T goes on to make the point about the European crisis going on currently and how, I forget the location. I believe it was, well, this happens all over Europe. He's talking about the no-go zones that have occurred in places like England, France, Sweden. I believe there's some in Germany as well. And Shane makes what it is probably the worst comparison in this entire video. He goes on to say, well, oh, the Chinese, the Irish, the Italian, they had their own little villages filled with culture and filled with all these things, and they kind of set up borders. And, oh, how is that different from the borders you're advocating, T? That's a stupid comparison, and I'll explain why now. First off, to compare it to the Chinese, Irish, and Italian communities that emerged on like the East and West Coast in the United States is, again, a false comparison because, as we've explained already, the cultures are inherently different. The culture of East Asia is different from the culture of Southeast Asia, which is different from the culture of the Indian subcontinent, which is different from the culture of the Middle East, which is different from the culture of Europe. These groups were nowhere near as violent as the current stream of migrants we are seeing come into Europe. It is completely inaccurate to make that comparison. And on top of that, he mentions the fact that there are Muslim militias currently patrolling the streets of the neighborhoods that they have procured. Most of them have not bought it. Shane seems to think that a lot of these migrants have come here and they've actually bought the property themselves, and that, oh, they just bought the property, so it's their right to do what they want with it. No, that did not happen, Shane. If you follow anything in German politics or French politics, most of the areas that are currently controlled by migrants were once owned by French and German and English citizens who were booted from their place of residence in order to make room for the migrants. It is not simple, oh, they came and they bought it with their own money. No, 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 no. The government forcefully evicted citizens to make room for the people who were coming here out of nowhere, who had no claim, who weren't coming to get jobs, who were simply coming to leech off of the welfare state. So there you go. There's a fine example of how the welfare state will be used against you inevitably if you just allow mass immigration. And onto this comparison that them having their property that they now have, not like they bought it or anything, like Shane seems to imagine in his wonderful little fantasy world, but the property they came, the property, let's say they even did buy this property and are now violently patrolling the streets as if it were their own little country. Well, I mean, they could if it were their country, if it were their property, but it's not. And the people going into these neighborhoods aren't aware most of the time of what the rules are going in. When you go into Saudi Arabia, when you're a Western woman going to Saudi Arabia or Pakistan or Iran, you know the risks, you know the rules, you're prepared for what you're going to, and you prepare accordingly. You get a hijab, you maybe take a couple courses on the culture or learn the language or something along those lines. But the people in France, they don't get that opportunity. They don't know what they're walking into. They will just walk into a bad neighborhood in Paris, and all of a sudden they will be surrounded by a gang of migrants who will do God knows what to them. It's not as dry and simple as, oh, now they're their own country. Nah, it doesn't work like that. They just can't be their own country when they have to obey the laws of the people whose country they're already in. They don't just get to make their own rules now that they're in a certain area. That's not how it works. And people there they don't know how to deal with it. I don't know if he's seen any of the interviews from Parisian women and children or Swedish women sometimes, or Swedish officials on the matter. People live in fear of these gangs that are, quite honestly, violating the NAP. I don't know how Shane can justify this and say, oh, well, they're just a country and they're just violating the NAP. Yeah, well, some countries violate the NAP more than others. Middle Eastern countries being one of the prime offenders, and now they're carrying that culture over to places that were formerly liberalized. Altogether, Shane's argument just falls apart rapidly. It's insane. And the final point I chose to stomach, because as you can see, I didn't quite get all the way through. I think I ended up stopping a little bit towards here-ish, but I knew the general direction of the video, and he didn't have any points beyond that, in my opinion, is that, during the Cold War, we let all the Russians and all the Slavic people who escaped the USSR come here, and we said, oh, these were the type of immigrants they want because they hate communism. I'm paraphrasing incredibly, but that's roughly what he said. And so, he shoots the idea, oh, let's just build a bridge to Venezuela, have all the socialists come over here and talk about how great our system is. That's the type of open borders we need. First off, I don't trust that the people coming from Venezuela are coming because they will, try to work hard. I'm sure there's a good portion of them that will, and I'm sure through a vetting process that we may be able to find them. I'm sure we'll be able to find the good people, and we'll be able to let them in, and they can be good, productive members of society like the rest of us. But like a lot of Southern American and Central American immigration, there will be plenty, if not the majority of them, who come simply to abuse the welfare state, as has been the nature of things since the South American immigration crisis for the U.S. really began, since our legal immigrant crisis really hyped up. I mentioned down below that, and in my last video, that there's approximately 51% of immigrant households that are on welfare, as opposed to 30% of native households. And that's, again, that's not just illegal immigrants, that's immigrants as a whole. I imagine the vast majority of them are illegal immigrants, but I have not done the research into that myself, admittedly. Although I don't think it's an incredible leap of logic to assume that much anyway. But yeah, and then another thing about taking immigrants from Eastern Europe, second part of that phrase, Eastern Europe. The Slavic cultures might be a little bit different from the Western European cultures, but at the end of the day, they had an enlightenment. They experienced the Romance era. They experienced all these same things. I mean, Europe is a very different, is a very, very culturally distinctive place. It has a lot of different groups, a lot of different peoples who all have their own identities, but there is something shared about Europe. It's not completely deniable. I'm not making the case for the EU here by any stretch of the imagination, but there is some common shared heritage amongst Europeans, and it's not even funny to compare that shared heritage to, oh, why don't we just bring in everybody because no culture is worse than any other culture? That's not true. Shane, I keep bouncing around because I keep remembering and forgetting points, so I guess this will be my last point. Shane makes the case that, or I should start with what T says. That guy T makes the case that we live in a democracy where our rights can be voted away quite rapidly because of the nature of it. And that is a correct case. And so he says that when we allow people of different cultures who don't respect those freedoms in and we allow them to vote, we allow them to strip away more of our liberties. And Shane makes the case, well, oh, if they wanted to come here for X reasons, why would they want to make it like their X country? Because the thing about their country wasn't that they didn't like it because of the culture. At least that's not a lot of the case. There are other reasons. They didn't like their country because it was at war, it was run by terrorists, or it was economically depressed. The culture isn't what they had a problem with. And that is clearly shown in what's happening in Europe, where you're getting these congregated towns where Sharia law is being implemented by violent gangs. They want the culture, they just also want the economic prosperity that they weren't getting over there with it. They want the freedoms and they want to be called the oppressed, victimized class so they can get away with whatever they want to. It's ridiculous. So to imply that they don't want their culture over here is factually inaccurate. We can look at what's happening in Europe and know that is not the case. They are trying to install their culture everywhere they go. This is a fact. I think that's actually all of it. Wow. Cool. So, I suppose I will do this. Don't know how many people are going to see this. Again, I'm sorry for the off-the-cuff nature of this. I'm sorry for how unruly it was. Oh, I see I have a viewer. Neat. Thank you for watching, viewer. Hold on. Let me actually try to see. I'm sorry. I'm futzing around here only because I want to catch your name and I want to try to see who you are. So let me just go to my channel and I'll watch my own stream like a loser. Ali Johnston. Hello. Thanks for watching. I don't know what time it is for you wherever you're watching from, but for me it's stupid late. And I have stupid early classes, but whatever. Thanks for being a part of it. Oh no, wait, I'm the second watcher. Haha. Anyway, yes, this is just another naive libertarian case for Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm trying to chat with you. This is just another naive libertarian case for open borders that ignores economic realities, and it ignores the reality of just the situation at large, the cultural situation. There is a cultural element to all of this, quite frankly, and to ignore it is to be ignorant of history. There are a lot of people like Ron Paul who claim the only reason that the Islamic world hates us is because, we can drone strikes over there and our foreign policy is a mess. I think Shane references that once in the video as well. It absolutely is, but are we just going to ignore the battles of Lepanto, the battles of Tours and Vienna and Manzikert, and act like history didn't happen? No. The Islamic world has been at the throat of the West for millennia. That's common knowledge. And so while there's, of course, going to be other elements into it, we can't just blanket statement people, or we can try not to blanket statement people. We also have to just be vigilant of not selling ourselves out to those who do not respect our freedoms in the slightest. And so with that, I suppose I'll take my leave now. I've blathered on for long enough. Thanks for watching, Ali. And, oh, we actually have a second viewer. Cool. Whoever else was watching, thank you guys. And bye.